when you guys wake up in the morning, you got your coffee, you look at your computer, you look at your phone, what's your process? I want to know, from on a personal level, like how you're sorting out what the hell's going on in the world.
I wake up, my alarm goes off, I immediately pick up my phone and I open Twitter, and I just start scrolling through, and then I go, I'm not joking. And then I'm like, well, that happened. And then I sit there in bed lying up for about a half an hour, and then I, get to work, and then I'm like, wow, I can't believe it. I woke up to that.
James?
Well, I'm banned from Twitter, so... but distribution by proxy. Distribution by proxy, you know what I mean. I try to read a little bit of everything and try to read between the lines. That's the short of it.
Tulsi?
I wait a little while before I start scrolling through the news, catch my breath, and take care of, my personal time. And but I mean, Twitter is definitely not the first thing I go and look at. I'll scroll through a number of different news sources from across the spectrum and try to get an average on what's going on in the world, and then take it from there.
All right.
Well, I wish I could say that my answers was Tulsi's, because that sounds much healthier. But the sad reality is I'm much closer to Tim.
It's such a depressing way to start the day, though, guys.
But to be fair, Twitter actually is good when you're not just arguing with people. So there's real value in Twitter in that I have a list of people I follow, news organizations, activists, and personalities, left, right, and center. And so when I wake up, I'll see what CNN said, then I'll see what maybe the Examiner said, and then seeing both perspectives coming from establishment or maybe a left or a right source, then I'll have to figure out which one is actually closer to the truth. That's how I start breaking down the stories.
So we just had a little backstage extravaganza that I just wanted to touch on. Ben?
Sure. So if you think about media manipulation, then, and you particularly, if part of your concern is about social media manipulation, is about censorship, then you should think, well, okay, if you actually care about understanding the source of the problem, if you care about solutions, then you should think about what are people really worried about. We live in, despite being a wildly economically unequal society that's not very democratic in many ways, we live in enough of a democracy that by and large people aren't worried about getting arrested. What are they worried about? They're worried about getting fired. Why are they worried about getting fired? Because the majority of Americans work in at-will employment situations in non-unionized workplaces where the boss can fire them at any time with no recourse and no due process. If you agree that this is a problem, right? And if you don't agree with that, I don't take you seriously on free speech. If you agree that that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, every member of every worker in every workplace in the United States should be a member of a union, because when you're a member of a union, you actually have due process. You actually have an organization that will represent you when you're accused of wrongdoing, the same way that a lawyer will represent you when you are accused of wrongdoing in the criminal justice system.
Have you ever been in a union?
So people aren't going to be afraid of getting arbitrarily fired. So, in thinking about this, leading up to it, I was watching a series of videos that Mr. James O'Keefe here did early in Project Veritas, where... No, absolutely. So early in Project Veritas, where what is he doing? Is he sending in his little hidden cameras to CEOs meeting to talk about union busting strategy, or generals talking about drone strikes? No. He's surveilling ordinary working class people in order to demonize unions to make it easier to fire people. So he did this series called New Jersey Teachers Unions Gone Wild. And in that series...
Thanks for the free advertising.
Yeah. No, I think everybody should absolutely watch these videos to understand who and what James is. And in these videos, he's doing two things, right? So one of them is he's asking union officials, oh, would you defend me if I did this? Would you defend me if I did that? Which is like asking a lawyer, would you defend me if I was accused of murder? Would you defend me if I was accused of double murder? Yes, that's what a lawyer is, and it's a good thing that you can't be in prison arbitrarily. It's a good thing you can't be fired arbitrarily. And in one of these videos, out of the many, many sleazy things he did, we didn't highlight this in the clip we did on my show. I wish we had. But in one of these videos, I do wish I had because I think it's an instructive case. So in one of these videos, he's talking about a teacher who was accused of saying the N-word, and then I don't remember exactly what the disciplinary process were, but they didn't completely lose their job. And he was taking this as, oh, see, unions think it's okay to say the N-word, which is obviously asinine, obviously thinking that somebody's career shouldn't be ended over doing a bad thing is not the same as saying the bad thing is bad. So just now, just before we went on, a gentleman came up to me with a demeanor that suggested that, no indication whatsoever. Yeah, I'm being nice. No indication whatsoever that he was affiliated with James or Project Veritas. His demeanor strongly suggested that he was part of the staff organizing this event. Said, oh, can I speak to you for a moment before the panel? And so I came back with him. They did their thing, their entrapment journalism thing. And in the course of it, they said, one of the things that James said is, do you care about finding out the name of this teacher? And I said, no, because I do not. Because I don't think that if you did a bad thing at some point in your life, you deserve to be nationally named and shamed years later, whatever consequence you might have had at the time, whatever chance for rehabilitation there might have happened. And James, being the supreme media manipulator he is, responded to this by saying, oh, why do you think it's okay to use the N-word, which is obviously not what I said, but then again, James is a liar, so that is in character.
Evans.
James.
So the video can't allege anything. It's an inanimate recording. It quoted the woman, Alyssa Ploshnik, a union official in New Jersey, saying the N-word. She actually said the word. And she said that a teacher was still teaching after calling the student the N-word. As a journalist, isn't it a journalist's ethical duty to find out who that teacher is and report it?
No! Obviously,
All right. Hold on.
Duty of a journalist.
Bring it in, Tim.
You started this conversation with a political, ideological statement from you about the importance of unions, completely irrelevant to media manipulation. You started
it is supremely irrelevant to media
Absolutely.
manipulation.
You started the argument from an ideological perspective.
A perspective about media
Have you ever been in a
manipulation.
union? Just side question.
Yeah.
Which one? When?
I was in a couple. I've been in the.
Which one?
I've been in the UFCW and when I was working at Meyer in Michigan.
Noted and accepted. I didn't believe you. I couldn't imagine, based on what you'd said, that had been true, because I've been in two unions. I was in the Transport Workers Union, and I worked at a grocery store as well, which also had a grocery workers union. And they were so corrupt that I was like, the statement you made is just like your perspective I can respect. That's coming from you, but it's like a blanket subjective perspective. But I don't want to have an argument
Not
about.
at all subjective.
I don't want to have an argument about union.
However corrupt that union might have been that you were part of.
Two of them.
If you had been accused of an infraction subject to disciplinary process, then you would have had the option of having them represent you in that process.
Wrong.
Okay.
Bro. So I don't want to get into an argument about unions, other than to say, like, your subjective perspective.
It's not subjective. It's a fact that the effect of unions is to give you due process.
And sometimes they don't because humans are fallible. But I digress.
Okay, but you can say the same thing about having trial by jury, that like sometimes it's not a good due process.
So the issue is,
still a due process.
We're talking about media manipulation. Instead of addressing the issue of what you take with James O'Keefe, his approach, and his video, you took a few minutes to go on about the importance of unions and the seriousness of individuals. Right away, that's a red flag. I don't take your argument as seriously because you're trying to make a political, ideological statement, not a journalistic one.
Well, first of all, obviously, obviously, Tim, I am, like you, very much in the business of politics and ideology, but also what I was doing was I was explaining the context of the disagreement with James that caused him to do his...
Right, your disagreement is that you think James is opposed to unions and his actions are based on opposition to unions and not that he had a question about a teacher using a racial slur. That is irrelevant to the question of, hey, here's a video, you didn't show...
It's not irrelevant. Everybody agrees you shouldn't use racial slurs. The question is, if you do, should you have protection when you're about to be fired for it? Should you have a due process? Should you, as a person who once did something bad, have your name spread over all of media throughout the entire country because you once did something bad in your life? And I don't think so. That's a question of values, but that is the context. That's the argument I was making in the video that James was objecting to. And that is why we just had this argument in which he did his entrapment journalism and then lied straight out about what I just said.
Okay, so I think that Tulsi is the energetic ref. She's the energetic ref.
Well, I heard some noise backstage. I was not privy to this conversation, but I think, and this is the aloha coming to the conversation, we'll have maybe vastly different views on a whole host of things, but much of what we are seeing in manipulation of the media is trying to evoke extreme reactions from people, rather than having conversations like the ones that we've had here tonight, where we can agree or we can disagree, but really try to get to the heart of whatever that issue may be.
I saw a video from a protest yesterday where a bunch of protesters in the street were surrounding vehicles, and a pickup truck slowly began to move forward, and the people were, being pushed or, choosing to stay in front of the vehicle, in all honesty. They started banging on it, and then some woman ran up and threw something at it and then fell down. Activists associated with left ideology posted a photo making it seem like the woman had been struck. When you start your argument on the presentation of information from an ideological standpoint, this is what I see happening. Instead of saying, here's what happened, here's what the people should understand what happened, you say, here's my political ideology. James opposes that ideology, and that was his intent. I'm mad at him. So I think that's ridiculous.
Well, no. What I said was, here's the context of the argument in the video that James was confronting me about. And then, once that's established, also very relevant to the larger subject of media manipulation, then once that's established, here's what he said, here's what I said, and here's how
this is the media
looked
I've
into the
experienced.
camera and lied about it.
This is when I
was saying it was okay to use the N-word when I obviously had not said or implied this. And by the way, in the hallway just outside, threatened to try to get me fired for disagreeing with him.
So Ben, I have a question for you. Ben, is there any Project Veritas media that you have found valuable?
I haven't found it if it exists.
How about,
I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm just saying, like, the ones that I have watched, I don't see a lot of value to. Any ones that might be out there that there is value to.
Let him speak, please.
Anything that is out there that there might actually be value to, I think is done a disservice by being associated with somebody who is notorious for deceptive editing, is notorious for asking people misleading questions based on false premises.
James.
Can you just please name one particular edit in particular in the last decade?
That is a really interesting caveat in the last decade. Why did you put that in there, James?
Because on our website, it lists 1 or 2 corrections I've made in my entire career. And on our wall at our headquarters are 378 corrections made by the media. So when you say you deceptively edit, I would like you to give me one example, because no journalist is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. Admittedly, I have a website with 2 corrections specifically from 2011. Other than that, that's 11 years ago. We've done hundreds of undercover investigations. Can you name one edit, sir?
Well, my understanding is that after the case that originally made you notorious, multiple states' attorney generals said that when you looked at the full Acorn footage, that it had been deceptively edited. Now, maybe those multiple states' attorney general are wrong about that. Maybe you just paid out because that was prudent and not because you thought you would lose in court. But given that, not 10 minutes ago, you lied about something I had just said 2 seconds ago, you'll forgive me if I don't take your word for that one.
What did I lie about?
I just said it twice, but I'll say it a third time.
I'll release the full raw video tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm sure you. I will be fascinated. I will be fascinated to see if it's actually the full video. But what you lied about for the third time is that you said, "Why do you think it's okay for this New Jersey teacher to say the N-word?" I obviously did not say and do not think that it's okay. That is just a lie. That is just a blatant mischaracterization of what I just said.
So just because I think we might end up going in circles, understood your point. I wonder if we can advance this, and I'll make a point. People often say to me that James O'Keefe is deceptive or manipulative. I'll ask why, and they might say he deceptively edits. I'll ask the same thing. I'm like, okay, absolutely. Where, when, how? And there's never been an example presented to me. There's been an argument that, sometimes the people who he's speaking to, maybe the context isn't as grand as maybe James framed it. But I like to point to, I think it was Channel 4 in the UK that did undercover journalism the exact same way that James O'Keefe did. When they did it, it was on Brexit, and it was celebrated across the media sphere. So I'm just like, look, if I can look to Project Veritas and I can look to Channel 4 and I can see them doing the exact same thing, and you can't present evidence of wrongdoing, I can only see undercover journalism being done. Why should I make a negative assumption?
So, yeah. James, do you feel that the N-word insinuation that you put on Ben was fair?
Well, you'll see the full raw video tomorrow. So I don't, the journalism is about facts. There's only one reality. There's a conversation that Ben and I had in the hallway, and you'll see it. And we can try to characterize it and play this silly game of
or we could just quote what you said that I didn't say.
We can do this, but at the end of the day, it happened. You'll see all of it. And I really believe in what Tim said. It's every fact loads some value, and every value loads some fact. So what you choose to cover as a journalist, the question behind the question, really, it's not about editing. Not in the abstract, it isn't. Those attorney generals did admit that Acorn said some horrible things. Were the tapes edited? Technically, all journalism is edited selectively so. Words are arranged into sentences in newspapers. If you want to be metaphysical about it, I know you teach philosophy. I was a philosophy major. Yes, it's technically edited. But what's really at heart is what you choose to focus on, what stories you choose. So a legitimate criticism might be, well, why do you choose these subjects? Well, journalists have beats. They focus on one particular area. Seymour Hersh reported on Vietnam. Usually that was his priority. Upton Sinclair focused on the jungle in Chicago. He was an avowed socialist. I don't care what his politics are. I care whether they present the facts without color. That's my view of journalism.
So I'll add something. James, you once exposed Pinterest. I think it was Pinterest. There was a list of listed websites. Do you remember that story?
Yeah.
It was Live Action, I believe, that was censored. What I noticed was that in the list you presented of the censored websites, Live Action was the focus, but there was also a leftist police brutality website included on their list that wasn't noted by Project Veritas. That is not to say you did anything wrong by not including it. You chose the focus of your story. When I covered the story, I noted, wow, look at that. They also censored this other website. So I think there's an important point that I don't get angry if someone tells the truth but is focused on one element of a story. My issue with the corporate press is when they engage in sophistry or they twist the story to try and push a political agenda or to manipulate.
There's a great example I use a lot, Tim. New York Times is obsessed with Project Veritas. We have national security reporters like investigating us, not like the FBI. It's quite ironic. And one of the headlines was, "Documents show how far Veritas undercover deceptive reporting tactics could go before running afoul of federal laws." Well, another way of saying that is that we check with lawyers to make sure everything we do is legal. But do you see how they worded it? It was like, you almost have to like take a magnifying glass with a color in it to like twist it to see what it means. And they do engage, and it's not so much that they say factually incorrect things, they engage in this innuendo, this mendacious sophistry.
Real quick, in May of 2016, Gizmodo reported that Facebook editors were suppressing conservative news. I was shocked to hear it, especially because it came from a progressive outlet. And then I started being accused of being a conservative for pointing out that conservatives were being suppressed because a progressive outlet reported conservatives were being suppressed. Then they put in my Wikipedia that Tim Pool sides with the right. I'm like, what do you mean I side with the right? I read a Gizmodo article. I love how the media operates. It's all just sophistry and false framing.
Tulsi, what's your experience with this framing by both sides of the mainstream media? Or maybe they're not the mainstream media anymore.
I've had a little bit of experience with it. I think this is exactly the reason why so many people are moving away from what has been the mainstream media and looking for alternative news sources in new media and in podcasts and in other areas, because it has become so blatant and overt. I'll give you one example. The first day that I announced my candidacy that I was running for president back in, was it early 2019, NBC decided to run a news story that said, hey, basically Russia and Putin are supporting Tulsi's campaign that just began that very minute. It was what would become the beginning of what has now become a long trend of anyone who doesn't kind of go along with whatever the mainstream narrative is immediately given any one of a number of names, one of which is Russian asset or white supremacist or sexist or bigot or racist or fill in the blank. But it's something that's unfortunately become so prevalent across the board. And again, I think a lot of people are starting to see how these headlines are very carefully crafted. And frankly, the contrast of my candidacy and the candidacy of one of the other veterans who ran for president in 2020 with Pete Buttigieg. Someone did actually a side-by-side comparison of the media coverage and the headlines of, I think, the first weeks of our respective campaigns. And the coverage was vastly different, predominantly negative on my part and predominantly fluff pieces on his part, which just goes to, a lot of people talk about, there's so much outside influence on our elections and which country is trying to influence our elections in one direction or another. Let's just start with looking at the outsized influence that the corporate for-profit entertainment media has on our elections, because they are choosing who they're going to cover, how they're going to cover them, and therefore what perceptions they're creating in voters' minds across the country. I'll give one other quick example on this. There was a forum that was held, a presidential campaign forum, that was focused on women. It was called She the People. And as one of the women who was running for president at the time, I went and participated in this forum. Washington Post covered it the next day. I wasn't mentioned anywhere in the article. Every other woman that was running for president was there and was mentioned in the article. And so my press secretary called and said, hey, Tulsi was there. I know you saw her. She spoke. And they said, oh, no, we didn't want to include her in the article. Like, that's not, she was there, though. He's like, we have no obligation to tell people that she was there. And that was the reason that we were given. So the very clear agenda that's being driven by those in the corporate media, working with the political powers that be, the power elite on both sides of the aisle, this is what is corroding our democracy and making it so that as voters, when we go and say, hey, here are the choices that we have, no, those are the choices that they want you to have and that they want you to hear from.
I've sat down with investors, CEOs, presidents at media companies, and to your point about corporate press. When you go to the people who run these businesses, who are not journalists, you'll say to them, here's how much money I need to produce a big story. They'll say, okay, how much? $200,000, and we're going to do a year-long investigation. They say, okay, $200,000 investment. What's my return after 2 years, 3 years? And the journalist says, I don't know. We have to investigate the story. And so then the businessman says, you want me to spend $200,000 on hiring you and 2 more staff members to investigate something, and I'll get nothing in return. Sorry, not interested. Along comes the clickbait websites, and they say, hey, buddy, $5 grand, I'll write Donald Trump's a Nazi, we'll make $1 million, day's done. And they say, you got it. That's what's happened in the media. It started with the social media websites, it started with the algorithms. You can take a look at Mike.com. That used to be, when it started, they all loved Ron Paul. Ron Paul was huge in the late 2000s. But what was buttering their bread, and this is according to a report, I can't remember the outlet that did the expose, when Facebook's algorithm began propping up police brutality videos, that's all that was getting shared, along with intersectional feminist articles, because it was combining keywords, making them much more shareable. These outlets started turning into woke, intersectional, social justice, etc. Then it comes to a point where I get hired by an ABC News affiliate, and I'm told by the president, we're here to side with the audience. And they are young progressives, so that's the angle we take. And I said to him, are you telling me that if there's a factual news story that would offend our audience, we don't report it? And he said, I think that's fair. Wow.
Speaking of ABC News, Tim, I know I've talked to you on your show about this. ABC News executive on the hidden camera saying the commercial imperative is incompatible with journalism, which is actually historically a left-wing argument. Noam Chomsky wrote a book called Manufacturing Consent, The Economics of Mass Media. I agree with him that the for-profit mode, if you're chasing dollars, you really can't do journalism. I mean, some of our stories cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. No businessman would pay all that, certainly would settle all the lawsuits. So I don't know if there is a model for economic, what do you think about economic model for investigative
One of the challenges right now with timcast.com is that we want to do good investigative reporting and we want to do documentaries. 2 big problems. Documentaries cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's no guarantee we can make money off it. So for me, it's just like, I believe in it, I want to do it. But the second thing is, well, we've had people come to us and say, I've got a big story, and I say, we don't have a legal department that can withstand the barrage of attacks from the corporations and the politicians if we did that story. I don't know how to do it. Maybe you should ask James. He's got a legal apparatus that I don't.
Ben, how does Jacobin approach these problems?
Yeah, I mean, Jacobin is a independent, meaningfully independent organization. It's not beholden to wealthy investors or stockholders or big donors. So yeah, it actually does use its platform to shine a light on things that genuinely powerful people do. So it does actually, if you read like the kinds of things that Branko Marcetic, for example, has been writing there about the war in Ukraine and about tech censorship, he's much more of a, he's much more of a journalist. I'm much more of a, columnist and polemicist. But I think that he's been doing really exemplary work that he can do because of that. And of course, I do agree. Right? I do agree with Tim that, that there are certain standards of factual accuracy that you should absolutely not sacrifice for the sake of what your ideological preferences are, right? You need to tell it like it is and then make your argument. But I do also feel good, right? I feel a lot better being associated with the kind of media organization that actually is interested in taking on the most powerful people in our society.
Like the FBI?
Yes, for example, yeah. That is interested in taking on the most powerful people in society rather than acting as gutter-level snitches to surveil working-class people and try to get them fired.
I'm going to bring it to you. Ben, do you think that, so you just made an insinuation about big donors with Project Veritas. Yes.
Well, if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Well,
do you not have donors?
Do you think that was a fair insinuation? Do you actually think that James is
well,
subject
if
to
not,
donors?
I mean, the man himself is here. He can tell us. Do you not have donors, James? Because like a lot of that website reads to me, maybe this is wrong, but a lot of it screams to me laid out to show donors what they're getting. So for example, that Teachers Union Gone Wild series, if you look at that on the Project Veritas website, there is a little description of the setup, there's some embedded videos, and then there's a subheading called results, which, again, a lot of times organizations that are very concerned with proving to donors their money won't be wasted will do something like this on their website. In that case, by the way, what the results page brags about is the weakening of tenure protections to make it easier to fire people, which of course, yeah, clap for that, which of course, if you care about free speech, is exactly the opposite of what you'd want.
May I, when you first started talking, you made a statement of fact that was factually and legally untrue. And I think you said that we are beholden to donors, and you kind of grimaced at me and smirked at me, obviously referring to Project Veritas being, quote, I have the video. We have an entire audience of people. And you said that I am...
James, I just gave you the opportunity to correct me
You're the
if my impression is wrong. Are you going to correct me or not?
Ben, please let James
Please
finish.
let me just finish a sentence, please. You said that I'm beholden, quote, it's a direct quote, we have it on video, beholden to donors. That is factually and legally untrue. No donor has ever, and I would swear to it under oath, told me what to do, and yet on this stage in front of all these people in New York City,
oh my God,
you just made a statement. You just made a statement of fact. So in a world where you can say that, I've never offered conjecture or characterization in our reports, but you did that right here on a panel about media manipulation. We have nearly 100,000 people who give money to our foundation so that I can be independent. And the fact that the FBI raided our journalists and took our notebooks was so egregious that the American Civil Liberties Union is defending Project Veritas right now. So my question is, will you right now and right here come out against the FBI raiding the homes of journalists and taking their reporter notebooks? Because the ACLU and the Reporters Committee have come out against what happened. Will you do that? Yes or no?
Yeah. Next. So, what that's not a hard question. I have spent my entire adult life, which, by the way, I joined the ACLU, I think, when I was 19. So I've spent my entire adult life supporting the civil liberties of terrible people I think do terrible things. Now, let's talk about that phrase, beholden to donors. I did answer it.
He did answer. He said yes.
Could you not hear? I said, yep. That was the first word out of my mouth.
Why do you think they did that? Why do you think they raided our journalists' homes?
I'm sure you could tell me.
Is it because we're speaking truth to power?
I don't think you're speaking truth to power when you're surveilling unionized school teachers and trying to make it easier to get people fired. I think that's exactly the opposite of speaking truth to power.
Settle.
In this particular case, yeah, sure. If the ACLU's on your side, I probably would be too. But I think saying you got raided by the FBI, therefore what you generally do is speaking truth to power is one hell of a logical leap. Of course that doesn't mean that we just went through in detail an example of you doing exactly the opposite of speaking truth to power. Now, if I'm wrong that you have big donors, please correct me.
Because having big donors...
I didn't hear you correct me. I gave you the opportunity several times to correct me.
Listen.
Beholden does not mean you were asked to change something.
You have to moderate.
Beholden means
Ben, you don't have to yell.
How to appeal to them.
You don't have to yell. Okay.
I don't have advertising breaks where people say, brought to you by Pfizer, brought to you by Pfizer, brought to you by Pfizer, brought to you by Pfizer. I don't have advertisers. So when someone is brought to you by Pfizer, doesn't that make it a little difficult to investigate the billion-dollar companies who pay? No donor has ever told us what to do. And you made a statement here today, and what you did was indicative of the very problem in media. You offered your opinion as fact. You said you're beholden by, quote, beholden by your donors, which is legally and fiduciarily untrue. No donor has ever told us what to do, yet you said that.
What did I just say,
With no
James?
evidence.
What's the last sentence?
Ben,
before
Ben,
this?
Can I say one, I want to say one thing?
Yes, one thing.
I actually subscribe to Jacobin. They do defend free speech. I do respect that, and I've read many of their articles that are actually pretty good. So I just wanted to say that, you know.
So
Respect.
your guys' drama isn't going anywhere. That's fine. So I want to talk about whistleblowers for a little second, generally speaking. And first, I want to hear from Tulsi about where she thinks the state of whistleblowers is right now.
If you look at what's happening with Julian Assange, we're in a very dangerous place. You know, I remember it wasn't that long ago when Julian Assange and the indictment, the attempts to extradite him under the Obama administration were counted as dangerous by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other mainstream establishments because they saw what dangerous precedent it would set for journalists, for a free press, and correctly so. And I give the Obama administration credit for not pursuing that because they also understood how dangerous that would be. Obviously, things have changed a lot. The extradition is continuing. It's been approved by the UK. But the problem is that post-2016 or 2017, when the WikiLeaks emails came out, all of these words of really dire warnings that we heard from these mainstream media establishments went silent, or they started to agree with those attempts. And I think this is exactly what we're talking about here, that when you have the influence of politics on these major entities that have been known for, you know, their legacy of being hard-hitting journalists and telling the truth even when it's not popular, taking on the powers that be, but all of a sudden it has not become politically helpful. And so they're now okay with the extradition of Julian Assange. I think this really goes to the heart of the danger and the threat to the freedom of the press, and frankly, how whether it's Julian Assange or Snowden or others, the protection of whistleblowers goes out the window, and you see big government coming in and prosecuting people in a very dangerous way where they can't even defend themselves.
There was a weird shift that happened around 2016 or 2017. Julian Assange was a hero on the left. All the activists loved him. Something changed. All of a sudden, he was right-wing, he was a far-right, he was a racist, he was sexist, he was a fascist. It's the weirdest thing to be sitting back, you know, at this time. I didn't vote for Trump. And I'm just seeing this narrative emerge. The media had been pushing lies about Julian Assange from the get-go, the case in Sweden, what he was accused of. I think what you see from Julian Assange in the very beginning, starting with, you had collateral murder, which was the release of that Apache helicopter footage killing journalists. You had Cablegate, the release of all of these communications between diplomats. And then the Afghan war logs. This went against the establishment. What they ended up doing, the powers that be, call me whatever you want, conspiracy theorists or otherwise, was an attempt at character assassination, career assassination of someone who truly was striking at the heart of the establishment. What they couldn't get was a popular activist narrative until along came those emails from the Democrats. All of a sudden, he was with Trump. Now he's far right. He loses the support of the activist base. It's mind-blowing to watch.
And we lose the whole heart of the argument itself. You saw how that narrative shifted, and the concern about the threat to freedom of the press completely shifted towards, as you said, character assassination. And it became about there's this really bad guy that really should be behind bars, rather than looking at not only the threat to mainstream journalists, but you look at journalists across the spectrum. How many people now have podcasts and shows and YouTube shows, blogs, people who are doing their own investigative reporting, coming up with different issues and facts and reports. It's not just the well-funded big dogs that are at risk. It's anyone and everyone who is doing this kind of reporting and considers themselves a journalist that is currently under threat.
Julian Assange is beyond the canary in a coal mine. He's a journalist. That's it. Whistleblowers come to him. He publishes information. They have effectively assassinated this man. Now, perhaps hyperbolic. They lock him in. They lock him up for 10 years. He struggles to work. They are destroying this man. It is absolutely insane what we are watching happen. And It seems like nothing can be done about it, but this to me is a really good example of if you ever do find a way to strike at the heart of establishment power, corporate power, intergovernmental power, this is what they'll do to you.
And so, James, obviously you all are working with whistleblowers on a daily basis, apart from some of the hidden cam stuff. Can you talk to us about how you guys approach whistleblowers?
It's really our mission is to find these people, and to be a whistleblower is to quote Dan Ellsberg, maybe the most famous whistleblower of the 20th century, the Pentagon Papers. It's to step outside the great chain of being, to join another part of society, the margins of society. Feels like outer space. There's someone who's with me today. David Johnson was backstage, blew the whistle on Hasbro toys. There he is right there. David Johnson, he, stand up. And just to let you know a word, I'll just say 15 seconds on David. David, was an engineering student at RIT, great school in Rochester, New York. 25-year-old engineer working for Hasbro Toys, saw documentation about things that regarding critical race theory, and was willing to lose his job for the public's right to know. So undercover work is about access. You need to have access. David gave it up. So I think as people put more of a primary value on politics, I mean that means journalism stories or political stories, everything's become so political, I think image will become less important. Image is now so robust that courage is going to be the thing that is the rare thing. So people like that, we had a whistleblower inside the FBI come to us. I've been working my whole career to do this. This is last month, 2 months ago. Someone within the FBI came to us, and that person was given a document by somebody else in the FBI about our raid against me. And I interviewed this guy in the shadows, and what this person said, which is very profound. This is an FBI, currently paid by the FBI agent. And they said, they bring us to the Martin Luther King Memorial as FBI agents. They bring us to the Holocaust Museum to help us understand where that thin line comes between where we are right now and where we're going to be. And that's why I'm giving you this document about the men and women in your apartment that day. And on the document, this is an secret, sort of restricted document that only the people on my case could see. It listed us as sensitive investigative matter. Project Veritas is news media. It called us journalists, which is a big deal. So we have these people coming out, and we need courage. It's really all about courage, and that's ultimately the most important currency in society is courage.
We just got the flash, so I just want to run through and any last thoughts, anybody?
The Trayvon Martin story, NBC edited the audio to make George Zimmerman sound racist by changing the context of his conversation. Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot, was determined not to be correct. Russiagate turned out not to be correct. Ukrainegate turned out not to be correct. Justice Millett turned out not to be correct. I'll save time and just say, you get it.
Ben, any last words on whistleblowers?
Whistleblowers are good. I have, I've done segments on Julian Assange on my show. My friend Slavoj Žižek has visited him in prison. Freedom of the press is very important. Also, freedom of speech in general is very important. And I'm sorry, I know this is ideological or whatever, but if you don't talk about that in the context of the workplace where most people spend half their waking lives, you are just not serious about that subject.
Tulsi, let's have a last word.
Tulsi 2024!
Stand. In this age of abuse of power by those in power, we all need to stand guard when they say, hey, we are going to start controlling what information you see to protect you from disinformation. And we will tell you what is information, what is disinformation. We want to protect you from hate speech, and we will tell you what hate speech is. And we'll tell you if you are guilty of such so-called hate speech, and then we're going to come after you. Freedom of speech is critical. It is the foundation of our Constitution. And the only way we will protect our free speech is when every one of us stands up to protect it, whether it's against the government or big tech or any forces seeking to undermine that. Discern for ourselves, find the truth, use our voices, and stand up for those exercising their right to free speech, whether they agree or not.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming. One more thing.
Tim?
The First Amendment, you said it was the basis of the Constitution, and the Second Amendment is just there in case the first one doesn't work out.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.